Valhalla is a small game in most senses of the word. It has only a couple of locations, it tells a very contained and personal narrative, and its only real reward for playing is learning more about the people around you. It's even on the shorter end of the spectrum for visual novel-style games, though something like Planetarian is still about a quarter of Valhalla's length. Valhalla is also a game dealing heavily in the mundane, similar to a slice-of-life anime like the currently airing Sakura Quest, or the majority of the work done by Kyoto Animation. These types of stories, when compared to the likes of AAA games or big Western TV shows, have practically no narrative stakes. That isn't to say the conflicts in Valhalla or these slice-of-life shows are small to the characters. The game's most standard goal is avoiding eviction for not paying rent on time for the third month in a row. The rest of Jill's story is wrapped up in the irony of how much she tries to help others with their problems while having allowed herself to be racked with guilt for years about her last breakup. At a personal level, these are big issues and have consequences for her relationship to other characters, but even resolving these conflicts will have little obvious effect beyond that. It's not flashy or bombastic, but it's a completely human story, even if some of the characters are decidedly not. Everyone who walks into the bar could easily be a major character, if not the protagonist, of another story in Valhalla's world. Everyone's the protagonist of their own story, and at the end of the day, they just want someplace to go to get away from what's going on outside. Maybe reminisce about days gone by. Maybe they need someone to talk to. Maybe their life's gone off the rails and they're still picking up the pieces. Valhalla has a laser focus on the people in its world, and because of this, it also happens to be one of the best examples of the definition of cyberpunk in games. The few systems it has do well to characterize the world, and in particular the state of alcohol. This is a bartending game after all, but it's who the game focuses on that makes it truly cyberpunk. Emphasis on the punk. In the grand scheme of things, Jill is a nobody to Glitch City, just like the vast majority of us are to wherever we live. We might think we're the most important people on the planet, but outside of our little world, we're just another random person. That's who cyberpunk is traditionally about. The people getting by and the people on the fringes of whatever society they're in, not corporate executives or politicians. If the main characters happen to even be in law enforcement, they're almost always working at the edges of whatever society they live in. Just look at Deckard in Blade Runner or Motoko in Ghost in the Shell for some high-profile examples. The rest of the cast follows this tradition quite well, with Alma, Jill's newish hacker friend, and Dorothy the Lilim sex worker being my favorites. Jill's boss has a hilariously vague backstory, mostly built out of tall tales and rumors she probably made up. The other bartender is always off doing something probably illegal, or at the very least dangerous. Jillian isn't even his real name, by the way. One of the other regulars is a big-hearted assassin, even if he's quiet, with a bit of a penchant for philosophy. Even the two most well-to-do characters, in the socio-political sense, Stella, a member of a wealthy family, and Say, a white knight, are living around the fringes. Stella especially has it rough given that she was one of the rare people to suffer from nanomachine rejection and now looks like a cat girl thanks to the treatment. Say, while technically being part of Glitch City's security forces, is more akin to a firefighter than anything else, but is still lumped in with the enforcers when people talk about the organization, and she suffers some pretty major consequences for it. So we've gotten the punk part down pretty well. The cyber part is where Valhalla gets to be more than just a fun, cozy slice-of-life style game. It's where we get to the dystopia and the game's secondary goal, after telling a personal story, making dystopia just another part of life. I've already brought up the state of alcohol in Glitch City, and it's disturbing when you think about it for any length of time. The bars in Glitch City don't serve alcohol in the traditional sense. Instead, they serve chemical mixtures that can replicate old-style drinks. Take the beer you serve. It's not made from anything we'd recognize. Sure, it probably has some organic material in it, whatever Bronson roots are, but everything else is likely manufactured in a lab somewhere. The beer's description even mentions that traditionally brewed beer is a luxury. Think about that. In this world, PBR, or your local equivalent, is a luxury, if it exists at all. You aren't serving vodka or scotch, you're serving weird chemical compounds that get people drunk. I know that's what cocktails are, but they at least have a traditional base. You also have to consider the general implications this has. Alcohol is a fixture of nearly every civilization on the planet, and people have found a way to make alcohol out of anything organic. Just look at how many kinds of vodka there are. Valhalla is a world where corporations have so taken over the alcohol industry that it's almost impossible to find a traditional drink in a bar. The The bars we see in Valhalla are franchised and all have the same menu, akin to how McDonald's operates. If the inability to go to a bar and get a shot of vodka or a pint of brewed beer and instead having to get corporate-sanctioned cocktails, including the beer, doesn't say Cyberpunk Dystopia, I'm not sure what would. As for the far more insidious yet invisible nanomachines, if you're in Glitch City, you're infected with them. We're never given a clear idea of what exactly they're for other than keeping track of people, and yet infection is required in spite of the fatality rate of nanomachine rejection. Other than the risk associated with them, the nanomachines are hardly ever brought up, and this is why they're such an effective part of Valhalla's world. It's easy to forget about them even when someone like Stella has to deal with the consequences of their presence on a daily basis, at least as far as her appearance is concerned. They're brought up again 6 days after Stella's introduction as tangentially related to the reason for Gabby's visit, and even then it's easy to gloss over their existence because nanomachine rejection is talked about like asthma caused by pollution and not something more insidious. While they haven't been used for anything blatantly evil, the possibility of them being used for more overt control or other horrific ends is always there. That being said, everyone still has to live their lives in Glitch City, nanomachines aside. The Apollo Bank incident casts a long shadow over the course of the December the game is set in, but Jill never experiences the full brunt of any of these events. Again, her two biggest problems are the looming threat of eviction and dealing with the fallout of her ex's death. Not small problems for her, but small when compared to the events surrounding her, even if she was stuck at the bar the night the bank incident ended. The Apollo Bank is downplayed as far as its grand repercussions go and instead is filtered through the effect it has on Say and by extension Stella. While it does shake up some of the structures of the city, we only really understand its finer details because of Jill's budding friendship with Say and Stella. It's through Say we learn more about what happened inside the bank, though Dana is the one who first mentions the White Knight lynchings. What's also tragically real about the Apollo Bank incident is how blasé it's played until we find out Say has been caught up in it. Even though Jill, Dana, and frankly most of the cast are all empathetic people, the way they talk about current events is fairly detached. When you're surrounded by something, even horrific violence, you become numb to it, and that's no less true of the characters we talk with in Glitch City. While the Apollo Bank was a particularly large attack, Jill's only ever empathetic in the broadest sense. She hopes those affected are okay, and she's reasonably concerned about the whole situation. It isn't until Stella comes in on the verge of a breakdown that reality sets in. When Say stumbles in the next day, Jill helps her to the best of her abilities, and, if you know Say well enough, provides her with some much-needed support. Valhalla's dystopia isn't quite as traditional as something like Papers, Please is. It's always there in the background, gently and sometimes forcefully weighing down on everyday life. But everyday life is still quite recognizable even with the advances in technology and corruption. It hasn't filled every corner of people's lives yet. You might even forget you're living in a dystopia if you talk to someone long enough about other things. The simple fact that you can forget about the violence outside and the horrible corruption lacing the city's government is why it works so well. What's been going on in Glitch City doesn't shock anyone until something like a badly injured Say walking into the bar happens. It's part of everyday life and everyone's still capable of having some fun and being wrapped up in their own problems. The fact that everyone has accepted the state of the city is in many ways more disturbing than seeing some kind of organized resistance or even just directed violence. Day 4, December 16th, is probably the best example of this early on. Over the course of the night, there are repeated sounds of what might be gunshots, with everyone having their own explanation for what it is. It isn't to say that there aren't harmless things that sound like gunshots, but everyone's lackadaisical reactions are what drive the point home. Outside of the minimal amusement from guessing what the sound is, no one pays much attention to it or bothers to figure out what's causing it. Violence is so prevalent that speculating on whether or not something is a gunshot is part of normal conversation. And the only reason it's brought up throughout the course of the night is because of how constant the sound is, not out of any concern or real curiosity. While it's implied that whatever the sound was that night was related to the Apollo Bank incident, none of the characters bring it up as a possibility later. Think about that. Everyone is so used to being around this sort of thing that it barely registers they might have heard the beginning of one of the most important events in Glitch City's history. I'm by no means saying these characters are bad people. In fact, almost everyone you interact with in Valhalla is quite the opposite. Even if they're a bit eccentric or initially distant, they're usually kind and supportive regardless of what walk of life they're from. Being around so much horrible news and violence doesn't lend itself to opening up to people, but when someone does open up or takes the time to listen to someone else's problems, that relationship becomes something to be cherished. Having these friends around also means everyone's more focused on the people around them than the goings-on of Glitch City. The commonplace violence will fade into the background, just like how Valhalla's Dystopia does as its more personal story becomes the focus later in the game. Ultimately, Valhalla is a story about people connecting with and supporting each other in a world that doesn't care what happens to them. Valhalla's dystopia is indifferent to those without power unless they're trying to upset the current order. For all the horrifying social problems and constant threat of violence in Glitch City, you still have to show up to work. You still have to pay your bills. You can't be late with rent 3 months in a row. You have to keep living in spite of what's going on around you lest it swallow you whole. Yet through all this, you won't be alone.